Okay, so today we're going to look at the Hedonic Calculus, which is Jeremy Bentham's idea of how to calculate happiness. So the key idea with the Hedonic Calculus is that we can work out kind of the type and nature, the quantity of pleasure. So the quantity of pleasure through 7 tests. Now, I think one of the important things to understand with Jeremy Bentham as a character is that he was a social reformer. But he was interested especially in governmental ethics. Kind of the best way to run government for the happiness of most people. So sometimes we can get bogged down in this idea that utilitarianism is a personal moral theory, which it is. It's also a governmental moral theory. And in that context, sometimes it makes a little bit more sense. You want a government that's interested in your happiness, right? Surely. So why not give it the tools to make the best decisions that it can about that? The fundamental workings of Bentham's utilitarianism is the cardinal. Now, the cardinal is the idea that you simply turn ethics into an equation. You've got to kind of add up all of the kind of the pleasure, let's say 10, and you take away the pain of any particular action, and then you have the result, and that result is the result of that particular action. And you've got to look, as you decide this, at all of your potential consequences, all of your potential outcomes over here, and work out which act will produce the most amount of pleasure. So it is seen simply as pleasure as a plus and pain as a minus. And then the best outcome, the one literally with the highest number, is right. It's the one that's going to produce the most amount of happiness. Now, that seems oversimplistic, right? And I suppose it is. But Bentham provides us with essentially a means to do this. And this is the Hedonic Calculus itself, which comprises of kind of 7 attributes that we need to consider when we're performing the calculus. So the first aspect is intensity. So intensity, I've drawn a little dial there, is essentially the strength of the pleasure. So how strong is that pleasure? Now, as we'll discover later, Bentham doesn't believe in different kinds of pleasure, but different quantities, essentially. So the strength of the pleasure. The next is the duration. So the length of time it will go on for. So length of time pleasure will happen. The next one is the certainty. So how likely is the outcome? Now that's a really interesting one, isn't it? It may have already occurred to you as you've been watching this and studying utilitarianism that you can't always predict kind of the results of actions, obviously. So you've got to factor in ones that are definitely going to produce a lot of pleasure or some pleasure, as opposed to those which may produce an extreme amount of pleasure. Like if you buy a lottery ticket, right? The intensity and duration would be huge if you win, but the certainty is pretty low, I'm afraid to say. The next is I can never pronounce this word. Propinquity. Propinquity. Well, there we go. So essentially, how soon will it happen? When will the pleasure occur? So I've given you like a little calendar here to distinguish it from the duration. So the amount of time the pleasure exists for is important, but how far into the future that pleasure will occur is also extremely important. The next is fecundity, which is about the chance of it happening. And by it, I mean pleasure. Well, there we go. I have just made my notes less than perfect. We knew it was going to happen at some point. Okay, number 6, purity. Purity is really what this is all about. Is it more pleasure without pain? So how much pleasure is there compared to the pain? Is it a pretty pure pleasure, or have you got to undergo quite a lot of pain in order to achieve it, or someone's got to undergo a lot of pain in order to achieve it? And finally, the extent. So that is the number of people that will be affected by the action. Now remember, Bentham's living several hundred years ago, and the number of people being affected by any given action are significantly smaller than the number of people that would be affected today in our hugely interconnected world. It's a thing you've got to bear in mind. What I'd like to do is just do a quick little application at the end of this tutorial. Let's say you have really two options. You can either kind of go and eat a nice meal, make a gigantic feast for yourself, in fact. You can enjoy too much food. Or you can do what I'm sure you would think instinctively is the right thing and watch another tutorial video. In fact, this tutorial video, you can learn. Well, then you can apply this test to it. Well, enjoying the food is probably much more intensely kind of pleasurable than learning. But maybe the amount of time that the pleasure goes on for is more to do with learning. I mean, once you've learned something, it's there in your mind and you can call it back again and again. Both of them are pretty certain, though. Both of them will happen instantly, but the result of this will happen in the long term, right? So if we learn now, then we have earning potential later. Both of them will give you pretty likely to result in pleasure. Probably more this one than this one, but hey, look, you're not reviewing me right now. The next is pleasure, the purity of the pleasure. Well, actually, if you eat this much food, you're going to end up in pain. I'm not saying the example I'm giving here is to do with feasting rather than just eating a little bit. So you're going to end up in a lot of pain as a result of indigestion, whereas here you might get a bit bored. Sorry, but you're not going to end up in pain. the number of people that's affected. Well, here that's just you, whereas over here, by learning, you can help others. So you might end up saying, yes, this is the right one to do, and that is why you should go and watch another tutorial video.